everyone, welcome back to the 13 Days of Halloween, Day 2. It's Justine, and we're going to be making this card today. It's actually inspired by a friend of mine, Francine. I'll link to her blog below in the description. She had made a similar background last week for My Favorite Things, and I thought I'd try it out with this My Favorite Things stamp called Mummy. And I absolutely adore the stamp, not only because it's somewhat Halloween themed, but because the sentiments don't necessarily mean Halloween. So you have like a Just Because and Curses I Forgot Your Birthday. So I chose the Curses I Forgot Your Birthday stamp today because I needed to make one. I'm going to use my Misty here. Again, you never really need the Misty if you want to do this project, but I do like using it, so I am using this as my stamping tool. But you can use a regular acrylic block or a stamp press, whichever you prefer. But my stamp press is cracking and it's getting old, and I figured I might as well just use my Misty for my videos. So I'm just going to pick up my stamp here. And I apologize because my Misty doesn't really fit in the entire screen, so I just kind of have it put up like this. I apologize. And I'm just going to ink that up with Memento black ink. And I'm going to be coloring with Copic, so that's why I'm using Memento black ink so that they don't bleed when I add my alcohol markers to them. I'm just going to stamp that onto a piece of cardstock. This is a scrap piece of white paper. I'm going to be die cutting this afterwards, or you could cut this out by hand, so it's not a big deal what white cardstock you're using. I like to double stamp these days. It gives it a more defined impression, and with the Misty it's just so easy because it always stamps in the exact same place. Alright, so to get started, I'm going to put you in fast mode for the Copic coloring. I am using C1 and C3, and for the skin I'm using E000, E00, and E01. I believe, and maybe also E11. So to start off on the skin, I'm going in with E000, followed by E01, and then E11. So that was the three markers that I used for the skin, darkening up the areas underneath, or on the top and bottom of her face. And then I went in with C3. I totally thought I grabbed my C1 for this. It ended up being quite a bit darker than I had originally intended, but I ended up blending it out with my C1, so it ended up looking just fine. Remember, when you're doing something white in Copic coloring, white doesn't always necessarily mean that you just leave it. Of course, there's always shadows on white objects in real life, so you have to make sure that you include that. So I'm grabbing my die cut, the Mummy die cut. This is a die cut that you can buy separately from the stamp set. And I really like the fact that My Favorite Things has small stamp sets and with one die cut, so it makes it affordable to buy the die cut. I do rarely buy the die cuts actually for coordinating stamps, but since these ones are such a good price and the stamp sets are so cheap, I find that it's okay to splurge every once in a while on a die. So now that that's all cut out, I can remove the die cut here, the metal piece, and you'll see that it cut out perfectly, which makes my job really easy. But of course, you could always fussy cut. Now onto the background, I'm taking a piece of 5.5 by 8.5 inch Simon Says Stamp black cardstock, and I scored that at 4.25 inches to make a top folding landscape card. And I just want to place my card onto my mat, and I want to secure it down with some washi tape. And I'm going to be using the English brick stencil to make the background, along with some white pigment ink from Simon Says Stamp to give it that really cool, almost like a glowing night look. So I'm just going to place that onto my card, and I'm going to make sure that it's straight on my card by lining up the lines of the brick with my cardstock. And because I am not going to be inking up the entire card, I'm just going to be inking up the middle of the card, I can add my washi tape without any issues. So I'm just making sure that that's all secure in place before I get started using my blending tool. Okay, so now I'm coming in with my white Simon Says Stamp pigment ink, my blending tool, and I'm just going to go in the center and mark my way out. I'm using a very, very light touch because I don't want the pigment to be too much, especially because it would take forever to dry, 1, and 2, I don't want it to be very dark. So I'm just going over lightly, starting in the middle and working my way out to the edges, but I'm not inking the edges because I just want those glowing bricks to be in the back. So you can see what an awesome look that gives. Absolutely love using white pigment ink and stencils, and Francine reminded me with her card that you can do that. Sometimes there's so many techniques out there that I forget. It's really important to heat set white pigment because if not, it will take either forever to dry or it might smear with your fingers, so it's always a good idea to give it a nice shot with the heat gun. If your paper warps, what I recommend doing is grabbing, I don't know, a dictionary or a really heavy book and sitting on top of it for a little while. That's kind of what I do to get my cards back in shape. Depends on the cardstock how badly it warps and how long you have the craft heater on the cardstock. Alright, so I'm just going to heat emboss the sentiment curses I forgot your birthday. There's also a I feel hollow without you and a boo stamp as well. So you can turn this into a Halloween card without any issues. I just thought I'd make a birthday card. My sister's favorite holiday is Halloween, so I figure I might as well send her this card, even though I didn't forget her birthday. Her birthday's in another couple weeks, but I figured, hey, why not? So now because the pigment is dried, I'll have no problem attaching my embossing powder onto this. So I stamped the sentiment in Versamark ink, and then I'm just going to use my white embossing powder to go over the sentiment. Now, if you hadn't dried the pigment ink, the embossing powder probably would have stuck everywhere. So that's another reason why it's important to make sure everything's dry, because the embossing just wouldn't work. So I'd had a couple of stray pieces there, which is normal with embossing, especially when you don't use an embossing bag like I never do. And so I just wiped those off with my finger, or you could take a small dry paintbrush to do that. I'm just going to go in with my heat gun here, and I'm just going to emboss that sentiment. Some of you might be wondering why I didn't stamp this sentiment in white pigment ink. I find by stamping in white pigment ink, you don't get a very defined look, you get a very faded look. So that's why I prefer white embossing over stamping in embossing ink, or stamping in white ink rather. I'm just going to attach this mummy using some 3D foam tape that I have in my stash, and I'm going to attach it to my card, and then we're going to be done with day 2's card. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you again to Francine, who inspired me to do this background on the card, and always is my sort of downfall when it comes to my favorite things products, because I see her cards and I'm like, oh, I have to have that. Anyway, if you have to have that, all supplies used are linked to below in the description or on my blog. Here's another look at the card, and here you're welcome to subscribe to my channel on the right by clicking the subscribe button. You can click up at the top to visit my blog and the supply list, or you can click on the video to check out day 1's video if you missed that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for day 3.